Hi everyone, my name is Aneta. I'm an artist here on YouTube, and today I would like to make a video I've been planning on making for quite some time, if not a very long time, and it's a sketchbook tour. The major reason why I didn't make it sooner is because I had still some pages that had to be filled in, and all my sketchbooks require a lot of time to complete. Like this one, I started back in January 2021, only to complete it a few days ago. And the second reason it took me so long is because I also do a lot of stuff on my iPad. And the third final reason is that showing off your sketchbook can be pretty intimidating. This is not a pretty curated sketchbook, and it has both good and bad moments. And I'm okay with that. This is my tool to play, explore, and learn. And this is the way a sketchbook should be treated, in my opinion, at least. So before we start, grab yourself something to drink, as it is going to be a long video. And if I'm going to critique myself too much, please do not take it in a personal way. Please don't compare yourself in a negative way. Although, as I said, I'm sharing it for fun. I'm aware of my mistakes. I don't have a problem making fun of myself. It is what it is, and that's okay. So, after this long intro, let's jump in. And one very last thing, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay. The year is January 2021, and I have a problem every year at the beginning of January. I tend to suffer from an art block. My friend always makes fun of me, saying that she can tell whenever I'm art blocked because I tend to draw male figures, like I'm trying to force myself out of my comfort zone, since I normally prefer drawing female figures. And I think this was the case here. For instance, I like the way this guy looks, but the other two beneath are kind of wonky, and I had this idea to make some perfect swatches at the beginning of my sketchbook, and I don't remember why. These are actually some decent gouache though. I still have them to this day, and they kept their consistency, so that's that. Let's move on. Again, I'm in the worst of my art block. I attempted a shadow study on this face, and then I tried to draw from imagination, but these faces look weird. I was trying to stylize them, but the whole face construction is off. I don't know why I was insisting on drawing the ear so close to the jaw. Here you can see I attempted a copy of a fragment of Jules Lefebvre painting. Again, the face lacks any construction. The second attempt was better, but still I feel I was at my lowest. I also wrote down some motivational quotes from a YouTube video. I don't remember who made that video. I don't think I would be able to find it. And honestly, they're fine. It's pretty much that your blocked artist needs safety, you need to be critique free, do something artful every day. I feel like I was clearly desperate back then, but nowadays I don't think I would need motivational quotes, and what I normally need is to take a break, and that's pretty much all. The inspiration comes back eventually. This was the time when I was obsessing over some YouTubers in the animation industry, and I was wondering whether that could be an interesting path for me. Mind you, I'm still art blocked, so I started from this side. On the top right you can see some drawings I referenced from Pinterest. I don't know the original author of them, sadly. Underneath you can see a sketch from imagination, and I honestly hate it. I don't know whether it might be appealing to anyone, but I feel like this is so boring to me. So Then I drew this, and again, it is not perfect, still a bit semi-realistic, and yet I liked it more. So I guess this was my quest to find a sort of a style, and I really like these small studies. I was starting to have fun again. I imagine this girl being in the company of a fox with her long hair transforming into the tail of a fox. This concept was a work in progress. I've made some notes that maybe I should adjust her chin towards the head of the animal. This sketch beneath doesn't represent me anymore. I don't draw like this, and I don't know why I committed to this sloppy drawing. On the right side we have another concept. I didn't have any idea what to draw, so I started drawing whatever came to my mind. As you can see, this concept feels really forced. We don't know who this character might be, the purpose of this sphere she's holding in her right hand, or the purpose of the crown. I started drawing some fabrics and then realized I was wasting my time on something that didn't make any sense to me, so I left this drawing as it was. I apologize for having to cover her private parts because, YouTube. This is probably my favorite spread. Basically, that year my husband gifted me a set of pencils, and the set included some regular pencils and some charcoal pencils that I have never tried before. I remember having so much fun while making this spread. I tried my best to draw these mushrooms, aiming for the perfect shading. On the right side I made this small study, and where you see dark areas, that's charcoal. So definitely this is one of my favorite spreads. You might notice that I drew a very long neck on this lady and kind of exaggerated it, but I really like drawing long necks. Sounds weird to be honest, especially if the character is from the profile. I find them weirdly elegant. On to the next pages. I was listening to Bram Stoker's Dracula audiobook and trying to imagine the characters from that book. However, I think I didn't listen carefully to the descriptions because I kind of switched the hair colors of the characters. Like the main one, whom I don't remember clearly, should probably have dark hair, whereas Lucy, who later becomes a vampire, should be blonde. Yet I made that mistake. I don't like the torso of this character. I didn't care about anatomy, and it doesn't look very good, to be honest, now when I'm looking at it. So yeah, the sketch on the right side is a freehand sketch and sadly didn't go well. I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to draw. You can see also some small thumbnails that you won't be able to read well, but sometimes the easiest thumbnails often capture our ideas best. Again, this is from Bram Stoker's Dracula. I had this concept of Lucy being bitten by the vampire, and I depicted her sitting in her room. Later on, I created a digital painting of this sketch. I thought I had elaborated on this idea well back then. However, today I feel like the concept wasn't strong enough, and it was even kind of boring, but at the time I felt the opposite. On the right side there is a simple sketch that I really like. I love how the dress of this character matches the upper part. It's like a mix between the 17th, 18th and the 19th century. It's not the best of my abilities, but I still like it. Here we have another unfinished sketch. I somehow like the expression of this character. It feels different from what I did on the previous pages. On the right side, there's a page with some notes, including random ideas for new projects, most of which haven't been done. There are also notes I took from some YouTube tutorials and some colors I wanted to add to my collection. That was when I discovered acrylic inks and I wanted to expand my collection with new colors. I wanted to explore the idea of the girl with the fox that we saw a few pages back. I started with some rather rough studies of foxes, which I'm not happy with. However, I eventually drew this and it finally clicked. I decided to go with this concept and it eventually became a painting. I even made a video of it. If you want to check out the video, I'll leave a link in the upper right corner. I was really happy with the result and I still like this painting to this day. These are mainly acrylic inks and gouaches. I had a period when I was obsessed with the dolls created by the Popov sisters. I found them fascinating and loved their sense of fashion. I attempted to create a drawing that mixed their style with some quirky jewelry I found on Pinterest featuring some mice. However, I never continued with this idea and I don't feel motivated to revisit it at the moment. Maybe one day I'll get inspired by their creations again, as my inspirations tend to come and go. As for this drawing, it was another concept for a painting titled Coronation. You can see the title with a question mark in the upper corner. I envisioned a princess becoming a queen. I also made some swatches of my new inks, comparing them with the ones I already had. The colors are really interesting and I love especially all the muted tones. As I wasn't satisfied with my previous sketch, I decided to refine the idea and improve the silhouette of my character. Strangely enough, I remember showing this drawing to my husband and he said he preferred the previous one. I'm curious about your opinion. I find the new one definitely more refined and interesting. I also drew a hand that was supposed to place the crown on the character, but I never added the second hand, likely because I didn't continue with this concept. Right below the hand, you'll see my first attempt at gouache study in this sketchbook. Unfortunately, I couldn't do a proper study or dedicate more time to it because the sketchbook paper handles washes only up to a point before layering becomes difficult. I did what I could and it's not that bad. There's also a small note indicating that I made this sketch on the 1st of July that year. This page was actually a happy accident. I was painting with oils and when my session was over, I decided to use the leftover paint to make a quick sketch of whatever came to my mind. In just like 5 minutes, I painted this character. It's not perfect and a bit wonky, but I like the mood of this piece. It has a certain charm that could fit well as an illustration for a dark children's book or something similar. I also appreciate the effect of the oil paint, although back then I didn't know that you need to prime your sketchbook with gesso before using oil paints. On the right side, I attempted to draw Red Riding Hood. I wanted to create a Baroque-esque inspired hood. So the main focus of this drawing was the character's shape. The idea wasn't very original and I feel I could have executed better. I jumped into painting too quickly, dedicated a lot of time to it, and ended up not being satisfied with the result. And this seems to me a recurring pattern. I tend to jump too quickly into finalizing new ideas instead of exploring them, let's say, more thoroughly. These are some watercolor swatches. At the time I wasn't yet into watercolors, but when I ordered some art supplies, I remember receiving a small swatch card with some My Mary colors. I immediately fell in love with the green gold, which is this one. I also did some thumbnails, and on the right side you can see my attempt to revisit the painting from the early pages of the sketchbook. Unfortunately, I encountered the same issue as before. I couldn't explore the gouache medium as thoroughly as I wanted. The paper didn't handle too many layers well, so I accepted my defeat and abandoned the project. My next spread. Okay, so the next 2 pages are extremely embarrassing and I even considered skipping them, but here they are. The painting on the left isn't that bad, it's just a simple tree. However, the one on the right reminds me of the famous Ecce Homo painting that was repainted by a local lady in Spain. I don't know if you remember. It was supposed to be a depiction of a female saint, though I don't remember exactly who. My version is a poor match for that Spanish fresco. Underneath this painting there was actually a very good sketch, probably one of the best in this sketchbook. What happened was that I discovered I should use gesso to prime the pages, but didn't realize that I needed to sand it down once the medium dried to get a smooth surface. I skipped that step, so the gesso remained semi-transparent, and instead of using oil paints, I applied gouache, which is incompatible with gesso. I then coated the pages with acrylic varnish to make the colors pop, which they did, but these 2 pages ended up being a smelly mess. They don't smell anymore, but I remember being them quite unpleasant. This is a drawing I made and filmed for my channel as well. I'll leave you the link in the corner, although I'm not very proud of that video. It was a weird time back then, and this drawing was the last artsy thing I did in my old apartment. The composition is rather unfortunate. You can't really tell what's going on, and even the character feels a bit random, to be fair. Here I tried to revive my alcohol markers. There was a time last decade when everyone wanted to have a vast collection of alcohol markers, and they are still popular, of course. I love the idea of combining them with watercolor pencils and was trying to revisit this idea. However, I soon realized that I didn't feel the same thrill I did years ago while using them. I still have my box of markers and they still work, but it's a technique I'm putting on hold for now. I don't know, do you have similar experiences? This page was scrapped due to the markers bleeding, although I could have covered it with gesso and painted something else, but it's fine. Not every page of your sketchbook needs to represent something. Here we have a sketch that I soon realized didn't make much sense, especially with this weird PG-18 thing on its head. It was definitely a case of leaving it be and moving on. Here, the date is February 25th, 2022. I put the date in the upper left corner. And what does it signify? We all know by now. I'm suffering from an art block. It's the beginning of a new year. And to be honest, my memory of that time is pretty hazy. I'm not sure what I was trying to achieve with these sketches, whether I was just pushing myself to draw in my sketchbook out of guilt for not creating enough. Here you can see a sketch of a sort of Greek goddess, Athena, I suppose. It's not very creative, although I like the owl, or at least the part I managed to finish. There's a very unfortunate hand that was definitely forced and turned out poorly. On the opposite page, there's a sketch of a face, probably drawn from imagination. It's nothing special, no study or deeper meaning, just a doodle. Nothing new here, let's move on. This is my second favorite spread in this sketchbook, and I believe this is how a sketchbook should be used. I don't focus too much on making perfect sketches, as you can tell by now. I'm more interested in exploring concepts and ideas. I don't see much value in creating perfect sketches if they're not going to be displayed properly later on. Of course, if you use your sketchbook to showcase your work or as a part of a portfolio, it makes sense to aim for perfectly rendered sketches. But for me, I think my sketchbook is a place to pour out all my ideas, and this spread clearly represents that. On the right side, you can see a sketch that I made for an oil painting that's been in the progress for 2 years now, but that's okay. I'll return to it eventually. I also included some notes which are really helpful for remembering my initial ideas. Back to the left side, I was trying to come up with a new concept, but I found it a bit boring. Another one of those sketches with no storytelling, so I never developed it further. At the bottom you can see a study of shadows and light reflecting on a face, and I actually really like this face. This was a study of rocks. Initially, I had no idea how to sketch them, so I looked up to one of my favorite artists, Alan Lee. You might recognize his artwork from The Lord of the Rings, and I believe he will always be one of my all-time favorite artists because of his incredible draftsmanship developed over the years. I referenced one of his sketches from The Lord of the Rings and then added this mermaid. I thought it would be a fun addition, but the mermaid isn't very well executed. I exaggerated the shadows on her face. I remember taking a picture of this drawing, uploading it on my iPad, and then editing it digitally. If I find that version, I might include it in this video so you can see what I did back then. I used to love the technique of taking traditional sketches, adding digital layers and creating colors and interesting lines while still preserving the original sketch underneath. It gives a very organic look, though I don't do it as often now. Maybe I should actually go back to that method every now and then. On the right side you can see some swatches from Schmincke Horadam watercolors. These were my first granulating colors and I absolutely fell in love with them. And of course I finally acquired the green gold that I loved so much from my Mary swatch card. In this spread, I was testing some of my old watercolor pencils. I have a large set of Kohinoor that I bought way back in 2009. I still have it to this day, and every now and then I remind myself to use it more often. This was one of those attempts to get back into using them, but honestly I didn't connect with this sketch. I find it rather ugly. Next, there are some random papers, nothing particularly interesting here. And here I painted a doodle of a castle surrounded by the night sky. Of course, I was testing my watercolors again, doing some more swatches. In the next spread, I believe I made a video where I was testing my new watercolors. So if you're interested, I put the link in the upper right corner. When it comes to watercolors today, I feel like I have too many of them. Now that I know what I need, I'll probably trim down my collection in the future. Nevertheless, I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to try out different colors. And of course, I'm not going to dispose of them. I use them. I'm pretty proud of my watercolor palette as it stands now, though I'll likely continue tweaking it. I've also discovered that I'm not much of a half pan person. I prefer full pans so I can properly load my brush. This is another humble homage to one of the artists I really admire, Isabella Mazzanti. She's an Italian illustrator, and I've long wanted to own one of her books titled Carmilla. I believe that year I managed to buy it. That's a classic in the horror genre. Carmilla is likely the first vampire story, even predating Dracula. As you can tell, I have a soft spot for horror stories. Isabella's style is very delicate and simple, which I'm incredibly fond of. Yet, whenever I try to imitate her, I feel like a kid drawing in kindergarten. This attempt doesn't capture her essence, but I still wanted to try. She's well known for using pencils to create intricate, usually monochromatic designs with a great sense of limited palette. I could go on about her work and why I love it so much. Next to that, you can see a very quick doodle of a character. I used some leftover paint from my palette. I remember having a conversation with my mom over Skype while painting this. I don't really like the face of this character. Her nose is too big and looks odd. Even for a stylized character, I think I made a series of unfortunate choices here. In this spread, we've reached August 2022, you'll see some odd sketches that eventually became a painting. I struggled a lot with that painting and I documented the process in a YouTube video. I recall facing numerous issues with my camera and the entire recording setup, not to mention the many mistakes I made along the way. It took me a long time to finally complete the painting. Looking back, I realized this project could have been executed better with more sketches and by incorporating a stronger storytelling element. On the next page, I've dedicated some space to notes from an illustration course by Marie-Alice Harrell on schoolism.com. I really enjoyed listening to her discuss the rules of illustration and share various tips and tricks. While I was already familiar with most of the concepts, either from my school days or from being part of the art community for so long, it was great to have a refresher on the key points and rules. I didn't take the course with the instructor directly, so I didn't receive any feedback, but it was still an inspiring experience. If you're interested, I recommend checking out her work. She has a very delicate drawing style and I love how she uses watercolors. I had these narrow rectangular panels that I wanted to use for some paintings. Long story short, I ended up creating a series of botanical flowers and I documented the entire process in a YouTube video, so link in the upper corner. However, before settling on that, I initially wanted to create something heavily inspired by one of my favorite artists. Again, I have many of them. One of my favorite artists from the 20th century, John Bauer. I wanted to explore his concept of the famous princess. At the time, I was also deeply into Elden Ring. For those of you who don't know, it's an iconic video game released that year. My idea was to create a strange, ethereal figure with the long neck motif that often appears in my work. I made a small painting using acrylic inks and gouache, but I wasn't satisfied with how her profile turned out. Although I love drawing and painting her, I felt that I could have done better here. It was challenging to paint the fine details with a small brush. Eventually, I transferred the drawing to my iPad, used the same color palette, and refined it digitally. I originally planned to print it and hang it in my studio, but I never did, and I no longer feel the need to display it. In this spread, I experimented with watercolor ground, which is similar to gesso, but specifically designed for watercolors. I painted this mythical figure that I'm quite fond of, even though it's not perfect. I remember enjoying the process that evening. On the right, you can see a thumbnail that eventually became a full painting. There's a YouTube video where I document the entire process. The idea that inspired me the most was creating a character with 2 long braids. At the bottom, there's a study of a sculpture, though I lost interest in halfway through. As you can tell from the note I wrote, sorry, I lost my interest. I was also experimenting with some Derwent Inktense pencils here. This spread features some loose studies. I remember receiving a Caran d'Ache pastel pencil as a freebie with an art supply order, so I attempted to create a background behind this lady. However, it didn't work out for me. I'm not particularly fond of pastels, maybe because I never fully learned how to use them, but I just don't like their consistency, so pastels are probably at the bottom of my list of mediums to explore, so you won't find much pastel related content on this channel. Here's another drawing I made a video of. On the next page, there's a spread that I really like based on studies I found on Pinterest. I tried to dedicate as little time as possible to it while getting the most out of the study. So it probably took me around 15 minutes. Of course, we also have to account for the drying time, so maybe around 35 minutes in total. And with the leftover paint, I quickly sketched this container or bottle on the next page. I remember creating this spread on a warm late summer evening. On the left side, I experimented with a technique where you cover your line work with acrylic ink and then paint over it to make the drawing stand out. I don't recall the exact meaning behind it, but it was likely inspired by a podcast I was listening to at the time. Just some random words that came to mind, nothing personal. On the right side, I made some studies from images I found on Pinterest. In my opinion, they lack depth, but overall, they're not so bad. I'm pleased with how the hair turned out. Here you'll find some more studies of random faces, combining elements from Pinterest with a bit of imagination. There's also a study inspired by one of Wiley Beckett's painting. though I didn't dedicate much time to it. I just wanted to explore the way she put shadows on her characters, but I still need to revisit her work and try to learn a little bit more. Here I attempted a concept sketch for a painting of a mermaid interacting with a statue underwater, a well-known story. I envisioned adding a crown made of pink corals to the statue. Although I started the painting, I lost interest because the concept didn't feel strong enough. One of my recurring challenges is committing to a concept during execution, and I often realize this only at the end. I decided not to spend more time on it and abandoned the project, which was on a large sheet of paper. On the right side, you can see a study from Pinterest. I'll add the author's name on the screen as I can't recall it at the moment. I was experimenting with something simple and different, and actually fell in love with the fantasy landscapes and the contrasting colors. Here are more studies in an illustrative nature painting style. The first piece is a copy of another artist's work whose technique really resonates with me, so I wanted to explore it more. The second piece is my own attempt, though I'm not sure if I fully captured the intended atmosphere. Please excuse the washi tape, it's quite eye-catching. On the next page, you'll find studies inspired by a video from a YouTuber I follow, as well as a portrait of an elderly woman. I wanted to move away from drawing only young, beautiful faces. These days, it feels like everyone prefers drawing younger people, and I get why, I do it too, but there's a lot to learn from drawing older faces with their wrinkles and all. People often say you can tell a person's age by their eyes. You can't just add few wrinkles to a face if the eyes still look young. I made these mistakes in an earlier study. The eyes look young, but the face is supposed to be old, so the sketch didn't work. Here I tried using acrylic gouache, and I really like how soft and muted the colors turned out. The sketch isn't perfect, especially the hands. They aren't very detailed. The anatomy is off because I didn't plan them out well, but this was more about being spontaneous, I guess. On the next page, you'll see another piece inspired by the feel of From Software games. This is likely my third favorite spread in this sketchbook, featuring Queen Rennala from the game Elden Ring. I'm particularly fond of the character design and had a great time sketching the fabric. I'm proud of the shading and the gradients I achieved, and I learned a lot about sketching with a mechanical pencil through this piece. I'm not particularly fond of this small thumbnail. I attempted to use gouache and white pencil to create a moody atmosphere, but it didn't quite work out as planned. Overall, colored pencils don't really work on gouache. On the next page, you see a character drawing that I revisited later and used for a YouTube video. Here are some additional studies from Pinterest where I aim to step out of my comfort zone by drawing and painting animals. On the right side, the outcome didn't go as planned. The character's face is painted with black ink. I didn't plan the color scheme well, resulting in rather dull appearance. This spread might not reveal much at first glance, but I know exactly what it signifies. It features some unfinished studies and marks the beginning of a significant project, which is creating an oracle deck. Around July of last year, I decided to turn my ideas into action. Currently, I'm finalizing all the sketches for the project and plan to post a video showcasing the coloring process soon. Although I haven't fully planned it out yet, I hope to launch a Kickstarter campaign in October this year. This project is a major focus for my portfolio, and even if it doesn't pique your interest, I'll continue exploring and sharing new artistic endeavors. Regardless of your personal interest in the project, I hope you'll stay with me on this artistic journey. And here are some more sketches. This is the sketch that we saw a few pages ago, but it's a remake that later became a YouTube video. I decided to add hands to the character holding a small bottle with something that might be poisonous. Her green dress is meant to match the overall mood of danger. The reference was the Victorian era when the dresses were dyed with a substance that contained arsenic. We finally reached January 2024. Despite experiencing an art block at the start of every year, this one wasn't actually severe. I decided to paint some calming landscapes using leftover gold paint from previous furniture projects. I didn't finish this piece in January. It sat on my easel for about a month before I completed it. I also filmed the process and made a video, though landscape videos tend to underperform on YouTube, possibly due to the algorithm preferences on viewer interest. Nonetheless, I enjoyed creating something different from my usual work. This is a mixed media project, so there's watercolor, there's gouache, and there's oil paint as well. As usual, I used some leftover oil paints to create a landscape on the adjacent page. I like the moody sky, but the page looks a bit unfinished. I don't know, I might add some gouache to see how it interacts with oil paint, or maybe I could experiment with it in Procreate. That could be actually interesting. As you get toward the end of a sketchbook, the sketches often get more messy, and you might have a lot of empty space, so there's nothing in here, to be fair. I wrote down some ideas, a furniture project, a random sketch. Let's move on. This is another spread that, as you can tell, is one of my favorites, one of many. It includes some thumbnails and marks the beginning of this year, actually, when I acquired my first Lamy pen. I had a great time using it for writing and sketching. I also experimented with watercolor mixes and made a list of gouache I wanted to add to my collection. The My Mary fine gouache is what I use most often. They're excellent, and since I have access to a larger palette here in Italy compared to other countries, these are currently my favorite gouache, and I have some tubes laying around, so I will show them to you right now so you can have an idea of which gouache I'm referring to. In the top left corner, is the start of a larger painting I'm planning for this year. It features a lady on a unicorn representing an allegory of artistic inspiration. On the right side, I envisioned this lady looking at a tree with golden leaves, with her cat in her lap. I'm unsure about this second idea and might need to explore it further to avoid abandoning another project, but I definitely plan to continue with the concept from the first thumbnail. I remember a March weekend with terrible weather when I was inspired by an artist on Instagram. I'll put her name on the screen, and she creates moody, simple landscapes with a focus on hills and pine trees. And I was captivated by how effortless her technique seemed. So I spent time watching her reels and taking notes on how to approach such landscapes with watercolors. My initial attempts were quite basic and not intended for framing. The goal was simply to experiment. Despite this, I really like the small watercolor sketch I managed to complete in my sketchbook. It captures the essence of the medium well. Watercolors thrive on loose brush strokes and benefit from, avoiding perfectionism, as the medium is meant to live freely on the paper. Additionally, I quickly sketched something to test my new shades of grey from the Ecoline ink collection. These inks aren't light fast, so I don't use them for serious pieces. Instead, I enjoy experimenting with them for online challenges like Inktober. They're affordable, behave well on paper, and offer a fun alternative to regular ink. Okay, I feel a little bit embarrassed here because the first thing you see is a fan art of Penelope from the Bridgerton series. It's not the best sketch in my opinion, but I really like that iconic scene where she's sitting by the window stalking her love interest. Jokes aside, I really like the mood of that scene, as I too used to love sitting by the window looking outside, especially on rainy days. That was at my parents' house. I had a nice view from the window, and when I was younger, I spent a lot of time daydreaming, so that scene reminded me of those times. I also joined the wave of people, enjoying the series. On this page, there are some tips for handling greens. I don't remember where I got this information from. I was either reading a book or watching a YouTube video. I apologize for not being able to specify the source. It's a shame. I remember what happened in 2021, but not what happened in June of this year. I don't want to dwell too much on this spread. The sketch didn't turn out well, particularly the left arm, which I'm not happy with. Although the rest of the body is somewhat acceptable, I'm not particularly fond of it. I wasn't in a great mood that evening, so I'll just skip these pages. Here I'm developing the idea I mentioned earlier about the allegory of inspiration. This is somewhat inspired by a painting of John Bauer, but it's just a doodle. I wasn't taking it too seriously, just exploring the expression of the horse and look at that foot.
It's fantastic.
Here are my latest sketches. The one on the left is inspired by medieval paintings. It probably needs some improvements, but I think I found a good reference to help refine it for the final piece. The sketch on the right is a concept for my next painting. It will be actually a mix of both. It will be in A4 format and featured in my next YouTube video, so stay tuned. I'm also thinking about using this final sketch aka concept, as a design for one of my oracle cards where it could represent greed. And here's a random mermaid. Here is a small landscape study, though it's more from my imagination than a true study. The perspective is quite wonky, so don't mind the trees. I was experimenting with different cloud shapes, but the sketch, it's okay. Nothing special really. This one didn't work out. On the third to last page, there's a sketch of an elderly lady inspired by Pinterest. I had the idea of adding mushrooms to her hair, giving her a healer-like appearance. There's also a quick study of a character from the Elden Ring DLC. I had to closely examine the character's design. This is Saint Trina, and I'm currently working on it. I'm working on it on my iPad, and I'll include a screenshot of the progress in this video. And the last page for this sketchbook, there's nothing else out there. I finally repeated the painting from the beginning of the sketchbook. It's not perfect as the paper can't handle much, but I spent about half an hour on it. Maybe with some watercolor ground, I could have continued with my gouache. And with this piece, we've reached the end of my sketchbook. I know many people use multiple sketchbooks at once, but I've been sticking to just one. Now I'm switching to two. One will be a standard Canson sketchbook for practice. It's much cheaper than the Moleskine I used before, so I can focus on gesture studies without feeling the pressure of an expensive sketchbook. The other will be a Hahnemühle sketchbook with around 300 GSM paper, I don't remember exactly, perfect for painting with gouache and other heavier mediums without worrying about the paper durability. That's it for now. I'm not concerned if my sketchbook isn't considered pretty. We all have our good and bad moments. The important thing is to stay true to your creativity. So, thanks for watching this very long video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to help the channel grow. See you soon and take care.